Hare Krishna, dear devotees. My name is Madhavananda Das, and today we want to go on a bit of a journey, an inward journey. We want to speak something about Gambhira bhajan and learning to live alone. So before I start, I wanted to say a few prayers. Om Gyanatimandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshu Militam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Jena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadammayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavam Scha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitam Cha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dina Bandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakopadurubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Vyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, dear devotees. So we'd like to speak a little something in this session today about what we call Gambhira bhajan and learning to live alone. In the Bhagavad-gītā, as we'll discuss, 4 times Krishna says that a transcendentalist should live alone. What does that mean? How do we do it? Many people are afraid to live alone, and so devotees need to know how to progress on this path of introspection. And we'll have a few different stories. I'm thinking to also say a little something, perhaps, about Lord Jagannath's anavasara. So I want to go to the Bhagavad-gītā, and we're going to jump around a little bit in the Bhagavad-gītā. First I'll read from chapter 6, text 10. Krishna says, Rahasi stita ekaki, that a transcendentalist should live alone in a secluded place. Then in chapter 13, text 11, when Krishna speaks about the symptoms of knowledge, 2 of those symptoms are, the first is viveka desha sevidvam, to aspire to live in a solitary place. That's a symptom of knowledge. The second symptom of knowledge he mentions is aratir jana samsiddhi, that there's no rati, aratir jana samsiddhi, not being attached to the people in general. And then again in the 18th chapter, in text 52, Krishna says, Vivikta Sevi. When he speaks about qualities that are needed for self-realization, he mentions living in a secluded place. So Srila Prabhupada, in his purport to the 6th chapter, text 10, he mentions a Krishna conscious person well knows that everything belongs to Krishna, and thus he's always free from feelings of personal possession. As such, he has no hankering for anything on his own personal account. He knows how to accept things in favor of Krishna consciousness and how to reject things unfavorable to Krishna consciousness. He's always aloof from material things because he's always transcendental. And he's always alone, having nothing to do with persons not in Krishna consciousness. Therefore, a person in Krishna consciousness is the perfect yogi. And in Prabhupada's purport in 13th chapter, text 11, he says, naturally, when one is adapted to the spiritual way of life, he will not want to mix with materialistic men. That would go against his grain. One may test himself by seeing how far he is inclined to live in a solitary place without unwanted association. And the 18th chapter, text 52, we were just reading, Srila Prabhupada says, such a detached person naturally prefers to live in a secluded place. Gora Draganyagana Gocha Goloruharam Goranga Gudatama Gopyada Kopa Briksham Gopalagada Ratidam Yati Singha Gora Govinda Deshikavaram Satatam Namami. So we don't often think about the importance of living alone. Generally, devotees in the Hare Krishna movement, we think about we should not live alone. That's for bhajan anandis. We want to be goshti anandis. We want to dedicate our life to preaching, and we mix with people, and we give everyone Krishna consciousness. But Srila Prabhupada marks in this purport in chapter 13, one may test himself by seeing how far he's inclined to live in a solitary place without unwanted association. So this is a kind of test for devotees all over the world now, and for people. People all over the world, all of a sudden, are thrust themselves in an unusual situation where everyone has to live alone. And people all over the world are becoming very depressed about it. The rate of suicide has gone up. People are drinking more alcohol and taking drugs and things because we don't know how to live alone. And even I find sometimes that also happens to devotees. The nature of a non-devotee is that when they're in some difficult situation, they're always trying to find someone else to blame for that situation. Whose fault is this? Because they don't want to accept the fault themselves. And so this gives rise to various types of theories where people think that there's some kind of conspiracy, there's something behind everything. And there's so many conspiracy theories going on today. But devotees, they're the original conspiracy theorists, in actuality. Because we see that it's all a conspiracy going on by Maya Devi. She's behind everything. But the devotees are not interested in what Maya Devi's doing. They're not interested in that conspiracy. Rather, they look behind the curtain to see who's pulling the levers to make Maya Devi move. And that, of course, is Krishna. Mayadhyakshena prakriti suyate sacharacharam. Krishna says in the Gita. So sometimes even for devotees in this day and age now, we find it hard how to live alone. What should we do? But we should remember something, that this movement of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, although we're encouraged to be social and to interact with people and to preach, this movement began behind closed doors. And this movement ended behind closed doors. And now I'm in Mayapur. We left our home in Jagannath Puri about 5 months ago to go to Govardhan to do some kathas with Bhakti Vigyan Maharaj. And we were going to be gone for 2 weeks. And while we were in Govardhan, then the coronavirus really started hitting heavy, and Bhakti Vigyan Maharaj told me, look, Madhavananda, you got to get out of here. And he suggested strongly that we come to Mayapur, where by the mercy of some friends, we have a place to stay. He said, because you'll want some community and things around you. So we've been here now for 5 months, unable to return to our home. It's starting to get cold, and we don't even have warm clothes because we left home for 2 weeks. But that's the nature of things. In the 12th chapter of the Gita, Krishna says that a devotee who's not attached to the ordinary course of activities is very dear to me. So a devotee sees everything as Krishna's arrangement. They see the sarva karna karna. And they understand that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's movement, although it's meant for everyone, there's an inner and an outer part of it. I've been living in Jagannath Puri now since 1993. And we've taken thousands of devotees, maybe tens of thousands of devotees around in Purikrama and Puri. And to try to help devotees to understand what's going on in Jagannath Puri, we have a kind of analogy. We say that it's the Jagannath Puri University of Braj Prem. It's a school wherein Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, by doing his bhajan, teaches us how to do bhajan so that we can enter into Vrindavan. And each and every different tirthastali or place in Jagannath Puri, we consider to be a different classroom with a different lesson in that university to teach us how to advance to Vrindavan. So the first classroom is the Jagannath Mandir itself. That's the first place where Chaitanya Mahaprabhu arrived when he came to Puri. And according to Srila Lochan Das Thakur, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was going 4 times a day to the Jagannath Mandir every day. So that Jagannath Mandir, it represents organized religion. And sometimes organized religion can be a little unpleasant. And similarly in Jagannath Puri, the Pandits, they wouldn't allow Haridas Thakur or Rupa and Sanatana Goswami entrance inside the Jagannath Mandir. And sometimes they do things in a bit of a mechanical way. But we learned from Chaitanya Mahaprabhu that even though that religious system may be sometimes mechanical, unfortunately it's just the way things work when we have rules in a society, at the same time, he supported it. And there's a lesson we can have for ourselves that, as unpleasant as it may sound, God always supports organized religion. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu supports it, and Lord Jagannath himself supports that organized religion, even though the Pandits sometimes, they have some misconceptions and they make some mistakes and things. But Lord Jagannath supports them. He's still there today. So there's another classroom also in the Jagannath, in Jagannath Puri, and that's a place not far from the Jagannath Mandir, and that's the Gambhira. And there's a very different lesson in the Gambhira. There in the Gambhira, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has taught us that we should support organized religion, but we need to have a separate private place for ourselves if we want to go deep. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, although he's Sankirtanaika Pitaro, Kamalaya Taksha, he's that lotus-eyed personality who's the father of the Sankirtan movement, he began that movement behind closed doors in Shiva Sangha. And there were very strict rules. No one was allowed to come there except for very intimate persons. And even the famous story is there that once one very first-class brahmachari approached Srivas Thakur, who was a grihastha, and this brahmachari said, look, I really want to have darshan of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu when he's dancing in the kirtan. And Srivas said, I'm sorry, but it's not possible. And that brahmachari said, look, I'm a first-class brahmachari. I've never been with a woman in my life, and I only drink milk. And Srivas Thakur then thought to himself, well, gee, I'm a grihastha, I'm married, and this person's a brahmachari, so he's better than me, I should allow him inside. But Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was not happy with that. It's a topic sometimes devotees don't think about very much because we're very busy with running around and doing our external work of preaching to the non-devotees. But we have to see that in our Krishna conscious movement, it's like a train which runs on 2 tracks. And we have an internal side, which is the Gambhira and Shiva Sangam, and we have an external track, which is like the Jagannath Mandir, where we support organized religion and we make facility for a place, for a situation for people to be able to come. But ultimately, if we're going to walk on this path, we have to learn to live alone. Now, prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, that living alone meant living alone in the crowd because we were still surrounded by so many people. But now, so many of us are thrust in a situation. Here in Mayapur where we're at, there were 3 of us who came together and we've stuck together and we've isolated ourselves and things. And then after some months, we opened up to a couple of other friends who also had the same standard of not associating with outside people and being strict in their behavior. And now we're up to 6 persons that we come together every day. But it's not open for everyone. It's just for persons who have a certain mood and a certain, are going to behave in a certain way. So this is also similar to our situation in the world today. In the light of the Bhagavad, Srila Prabhupada describes, I'll read you a little something from there. The small rivulets that almost dried up during the months of May and June now begin to overflow their banks like upstarts that suddenly overflow the limits of expenditure. And Prabhupada writes, one should learn gravity from the sea and the rivulet. The sea is always within its limits in spite of the many rivers pouring into it. Similarly, one should properly use the assets of life and not squander them for purposes that have no permanent value. Uncontrolled sensuous persons play with the assets of the body and accumulate wealth, but the strength of the body should be used for self-realization, not for sense gratification. And then Prabhupada says something which I wanted to focus on a bit. He says, human beings have 2 kinds of temperament. Some are introspective, and others are extravagant. Those who are extravagant are enamored of the external features of phenomenal beauty and have no insight into the whole manifestation. They are practically asleep to introspection, and thus they're unable to derive any permanent value from the assets of the human form of body. But one who has developed introspection is as grave as the sea. While those who are extravagant are calm and quiet in sleep, such grave persons use the full advantage of the human form of life. So this is our situation today, that Krishna, like it or not, we're being thrust into this situation, whether you want to think that it's some kind of conspiracy or whatever reason you want to think, still we're not able to go outside. And so as it's said, when we can't go outside, then we have to go inside. The famous saint of Assisi, Francis, who Srila Prabhupada had appreciation for, he once said that what you're looking for is what is looking. What you're looking for is what is looking. But to understand that and to appreciate that, we have to become introspective. And it's not easy, sometimes even for devotees, even though devotees spend a few hours a day at least in personal bhajan, chanting their japa, and we're reading and meditating on the philosophy and things every day. But still, we're in the middle of the material world. Most of us have jobs and families, and we have to deal with so many things in the external world. And sometimes it can be a little hard to be introspective because of so many things going on. And so this COVID situation now is a very, very good situation for us to become more introspective and realize that what we're looking for is what is looking. So I'd like to just mention a little something at this point about anavasara. When we speak about the lockdown, there's a philosophy of the lockdown long before the year 2019, and that begins with Lord Jagannath. And every year after Lord Jagannath, he gets married on the day that we know as Pandava Nirjala Ekadasi, and there's a ceremony in the temple known as Lakshmi Narayan Vivaha, and Lord Jagannath and Lakshmi Devi get married. And then 4 days later, Lord Jagannath has his Snan Purnima, his Snan Yatra festival, and he goes up on the wall to give the public a darshan, and he has his public bath. This is an external reason for it. According to tradition amongst the Gaudiya Vaishnavas in Puri, there's an internal reason and an external reason, or gona hetu, external reason, and anta hetu, internal reason. The external reason is to give mercy to the common people. But Lord Jagannath has an internal purpose also. He's just gotten married now. But when he gets married, then it reminds him of the gopis of Vrindavan. And he begins to miss the Brijbasis. And so he makes up some excuse. He says that, coming up soon is my appearance day, because that Snan Purnima day is the day that Lord Jagannath was carved in the Gundicha Mandir. So Lord Jagannath requests I should have some public bath that day. And Lord Jagannath goes up on the wall. He sits up on the northeastern wall of the Jagannath Mandir. We've been there many times during this festival. It's a wonderful festival. You can have darshan of Jagannath at that time, even if you're a Westerner. But Lord Jagannath, when he sees in the distance the Gundicha Mandir, it doesn't make him more peaceful, rather he becomes more agitated. And he becomes sick externally. But that sickness is a deep purport. It's what my revered spiritual master, Sri Srimad Govinda Maharaj, would call Vipalamba Agni, Vipalamba Jvara, or the fever of separation. And this anavasara period then begins for 15 days between the Snan Yatra and the Rath Yatra period. And that anavasara period, I'd like to suggest also, it indicates the beginning of a journey. And that journey for Lord Jagannath is a Rath Yatra. Every journey begins with some planning. You're living in Australia, in Brisbane, and you're making some plan to come to India for Kartik and go to Vrindavan. And so that planning may take you some months, it may take you a few years of time to collect enough money, to get time off from work, to organize someone to stay in your house and different. A journey begins with planning. And planning in turn begins with desire. Where do I want to go? What is my desire? And so this anavasara period of Lord Jagannath indicates a time of introspection, where Lord Jagannath is focusing on his desire. And for those 15 days between Snan Yatra and Rath Yatra, Lord Jagannath is locked down and no one can see him. In the Chaitanya Charitamrita, there's two words which are used for anavasara. One is itself the anavasara. And anavasara has an interesting meaning in Sanskrit. Ana means something small, it means insignificant, it means a breath. And avas means some protection. Vasa by itself means to dwell or to reside, and the word sara means to move. So in that sense, anavasara means to get some breath, to get a small breath, to move towards love, to move toward that thing which is within our heart. This is the anavasara period. And as I was mentioning, the anavasara also has a synonym in Chaitanya Charitamrita, which is the word nibriti. Nibrita means secluded or in a solitary place. And you'll find in Madhya Lila chapter 13, which speaks about the Rath Yatra, this word nibrita is used there as a synonym for anavasara. So Lord Jagannath, he has this time of introspection, and we can learn something about it. The general meaning of anavasara is something which is ill-timed or an absence of leisure. But if we look at the word in some other ways, meaning that the ana means to get a small breath, it means also to become determined or generous. And ava means pleasure or wealth. It's a synonym for Shri or love. And avas means to move. So in that sense, it means to get a small breath to move towards love. But it also has a meaning of something ill-timed. And so this is just like our situation today. It seems like an ill-timed thing. And so many people weren't ready for this. I just really wasn't ready for this period of time. I wasn't contemplating it. I wasn't prepared for it whatsoever. But like Lord Jagannath, we should use this time for nibrita, to be in a solitary place. And we want to begin our journey. We should understand that every journey begins with our desire, it begins with planning. And so this is a time for us to be introspective. That introspection, as Srila Prabhupada says, is an important test in Krishna consciousness. So we've gotten this situation now. We didn't ask for it. My grandmas used to say that when something comes which you didn't ask for, then you should see that's Krishna's arrangement, if it's favorable for your bhajan. And certainly this is a favorable time for our bhajan, because before we were busy with so many different works, so many different things, and it was a little difficult for most devotees to focus deeply on reading, to be internal, to be thoughtful. And now we have a greater opportunity for that, if we want to use it. So this opportunity is a great test for us. I'd like to tell you a story also about Lord Jagannath. We make a magazine called Sri Krishna Katamrita. And in issue number 13 of that magazine, we wrote about Petit Pavan Jagannath. And we told a story there, historical series of events, which began in 1691 with Aurangzeb. Aurangzeb was a great tyrant, and he ordered an attack on Jagannath's temple and that the Rath Yatra festival should be stopped. He sent his general, his name was Nawab Ikram Khan, who was a nephew of the former Emperor Akbar. And when Gajapati Maharaj Dibya Singh Dev heard about this army coming, he sent some spies to check out how big that force was. And when the spies came back and said that it's a huge army, it far, far outnumbers our army. And so then Gajapati Maharaj, Dibya Singh Dev, he immediately made some arrangements. He hid Lord Jagannath. And he had another deities made of Jagannath, Baladev, Subhadra. And he put them on the altar. These were not installed deities. And so then Ikram Khan's brother, his name was Jamal Khan, he climbed onto Lord Jagannath's altar and began sitting on the altar. It was really, really a big rascal. But according to the Katak Raj Vangsavali, which is a local historical book in Jagannath Puri, which goes back for over 500 years, Maharaj Dibya Singh Dev gave those 4 statues to Ikram Khan, but those were uninstalled deities of Jagannath. And that Muslim, he destroyed those deities, actually said that he took them and put them underneath the steps of a masjid so that all the different Muslims could step on Lord Jagannath in this way, humiliate Lord Jagannath. And in the meantime, Maharaj Dibya Singh, he took the original deities to a secret room, which is said to still be there today, which is just behind the temple of goddess Bimala Devi, which is near the Nanda Bazaar. Nanda Bazaar is a place where they sell Mahaprasad in the Jagannath temple, and it's kind of on the northeastern side of the temple. And so that secret room is still there today. And so that for 12 years, from 1691 to 1703, Jagannath's worship in Puri was conducted secretly without ringing any bells or blowing horns like they normally do during the Bhoga offerings. There was a secret entrance to the side of the temple where the priests would go through a tunnel to come and they'd make some offerings and things. But during those 12 years, all the festivals went on. The Chandan Yatra festival was going on every year, and the Snan Yatra festival with Lord Jagannath being given a bath, and even the Rath Yatra festival was going on also. So Lord Jagannath, nothing can stop Lord Jagannath. After 12 years of all this, there was a kind of spiritual and economic depression in Jagannath Puri, because Puri to this day very much depends upon the Rath Yatra festival, and usually they get around 1 million people who come to Puri every year, and all the hotels, they charge more money during that time. That's the time they make most of their income. There was one devotee of Lord Nrsimhadev, his name was Sri Ram Daita Goswami. He was a local mahant in Puri, and he became inspired that he would go to ask Aurangzeb for permission to have the Rath Yatra again. And so he walked all the way to Delhi. And good luck. Aurangzeb killed so many priests, so many Vaishnavas. He broke so many different deities. But still, somehow, this Ram Daita Goswami, he had this inspiration. And so he walked there. And just before he arrived to have darshan of Aurangzeb, that night before, Aurangzeb had a dream. And he saw his Lord, in Islamic language is called Koda. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, in one song, he uses a very interesting language. He speaks about Nityananda Prabhu and says, Koda Nitai. And that word Koda is not a Bengali word. Most of that song is a Bengali song. But the word Koda is an Islamic word. And it adds some sweetness to the song in the sense that the person singing it is their mood is that I'm such an untouchable person that this is, for me, God is just Koda. That's the Muslim God. So Aurangzeb had this dream and he saw Koda, his Muslim God, and manifest to him in a very extraordinary form with two big eyes and a big smile, in a form that had no arms and no legs. It was Lord Jagannath. And Jagannath said, I'm your Koda, and I want you to allow this Rath Yatra festival to go on. And so Aurangzeb woke up that next morning, and he was sitting in his quarters contemplating a dream he had. And it was at that time that Ram Daita Goswami arrived and requested him, please, can you allow the Rath Yatra festival to continue? And Aurangzeb, seeing all of that, was completely astonished. So he had a change of heart. And this is a very little known fact that very, very few people know about. We found out that Aurangzeb at that time, to purify himself of what he considered to be his offenses, he donated some property to the temple of Lord Jagannath near, if you know Orissa at all, it's near where the present-day Kurta Road railway junction is situated. And we were able to find a document written in Farsi language, which is still available today in the Rissan government archives. It took one devotee, they wouldn't allow foreigners like myself to go there to the archives, but I sent some local devotee, and it took him many, many days, and finally he found that document and was able to get some photographs, which we printed in our magazine. So then in 1703, the ban on Rath Yatra was taken off, and Maharaj Dibya Singh Dev, the king of Puri, had new chariots made, and they started celebrating the Rath Yatra festival again in a wonderful way. So when I think of this historical event, how Aurangzeb has stopped the Rath Yatra, it makes me think about our current situation today. That Lord Jagannath and the devotees who are worshiping Lord Jagannath, who are like the devotees in our Hare Krishna movement, they were forced into a period of hiding where they couldn't go and perform the Rath Yatra. They couldn't do the things they normally wanted to do. And for 12 years, that went on. But at the end of 12 years, an amazing thing happened, that Aurangzeb, who was like the Adolf Hitler of India, was very, very famous as a terrible time when he murdered millions of people. Aurangzeb had a bit of a change of heart. There's no record that Aurangzeb started chanting japa or that he got initiated, became a Hare Krishna devotee or anything. But he definitely donated some property to Lord Jagannath. And it's said that in the end of his life, Aurangzeb became depressed and he felt that he committed many offenses and many wrongs. The general historians understand that. And that took place right after he allowed the Rath Yatra festival to again take place. So just as that anavasara period, which comes before the Rath Yatra, is a time of contemplation where Lord Jagannath is meditating on Vrindavan, and he's wanting very, very much to go there. And that contemplation gives vent, it gives way to his journey. So in the same way, we're all on our journey. And now we're under this lockdown, which is like that anavasara period. But this anavasara period gives steam, it gives strength to Lord Jagannath. Just like the examples given, if you have a pot of water in a small room, and you put it on a burner, and you turn the flame all the way up, the water will start boiling. And if you go inside the room, it looks really impressive. The whole room is full of steam. But if you put a lid on that pot, then you don't really see anything happening. It doesn't look very impressive at all. But at a certain point, that pot may explode because the pressure has built up and built up and built up. So in a similar way, our acharyas have encouraged devotees to be introspective. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, in his Harinam Chintamani, and also his Chaitanya Sikshamrita, he uses a phrase of antarmukh and bahirmukh. He says that the devotees are antarmukh, they're internal, they're contemplative, whereas the non-devotees are bahirmukh, they're external persons, and they're always looking externally for something. Who's the cause of this? And they see there's some conspiracy or something behind it, because they're not willing to accept the blame themselves. But spiritual life begins with tatenu kampam susamikshmano, as Lord Brahma describes in the 14th chapter of the 10th canto, when the devotee accepts responsibility himself. So this is a journey of introspection, but it's a courageous journey. Most people don't have the strength of character to go on this journey. They're afraid. And many, many people, when they become a little interested sometimes in Krishna consciousness, they have a little bit of faith in Krishna consciousness. Wow, this is a far out book. Prasadam's really nice, but I can't do this. I just can't do this, because what will my friends say? My wife will disown me. My parents, they won't never talk to me. My friends will hate me. It requires some courage to go on this journey of introspection. And this journey has different parts to it. It begins from a secluded place where we're contemplating where we want to go and how we want to do it. But then as we go on our journey, there's other different stages to it. And so many of us, we've taken up the path of Krishna consciousness, but now we have another aspect, another part of our journey where we're being forced beyond our will to be introspective. In the Gita in chapter 2, Krishna says, Yadnanisha sarva bhutanam tashyam jagati samyami yasham jagrati bhutani sanisha pashyato muni. He speaks about nisha. The word nisha means the night. Ya nisha sarva bhutanam. What's nighttime for all living entities is jagati samyami. It's the time of awakening. Jagarti means a time of awakening for someone who's self-controlled. And similarly, yasham jagrati bhutani, what the time of for those devotees, the time that most people want to work, that's the time the devotees are quiet. So we need to learn this science, as Srila Prabhupada says in light of the Bhagavad. Two types of persons who are there: introspective persons and extravagant persons. And we need to learn to be extravagant. We need to learn how to live alone. And it's not so easy, even for devotees. As devotees, sometimes the temple's used to getting so much money from the congregation on the Sunday program and things, and now all of a sudden there's no money coming in. Prabhupada says we can be introspective or we can be extravagant. An interesting word, extravagant, which is, he uses it as an antonym for introspection, or the opposite of introspection. The opposite of being introspective is to be extravagant and seeing things in an external way and just depending upon money and depending on external things. But now we have such a good situation where Krishna is giving us an opportunity to be introspective. And we should see this is the beginning of our journey. It's the beginning of a journey for our movement. I know of many devotee astrologers, and I don't generally advocate astrology in a public situation. Prabhupada said different things, but he generally in his lectures didn't advocate astrology for the devotees. But sometimes he would say things like, he told the devotees once in Vrindavan, he said, let's have some fun. Let's go to an astrologer. And Prabhupada writes in one purport in the 10th canto that every educated person should know some astrology. It's a bona fide science. We don't put a lot of stress on it because we don't want to see that my karma is the cause of things, or the cause of this problem is because I'm in a Rahu period or Saturn period. But we see the cause of problems, the cause of everything is Krishna. Whereas if I start focusing more on astrology, then maybe I'll not see the person behind the booth. Astrology means that we're seeing Maya. We're seeing the external energy. We're seeing the planets and things being in control. But we should see that Krishna is a controller of all the different planets. And we should become introspective in that way. Srila Prabhupada wrote in one article in 1952 in Back to Godhead magazine, he said, the present problem confronting the human civilization is due to lack of proper introspection of the goal of human knowledge. And so this is even true for devotees. We need to be introspective. We need to be thinking about why we're here. What do we want to do? What do we want to accomplish? And therefore, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu began his movement in Srivas Sangam, in the home of Srivas Thakur. We have to become conscious of what we're doing. Becoming conscious is a very simple thing, it sounds like. But Prabhupada, sometimes he would say that Krishna conscious means just being conscious. You're unconscious. So first of all, we have to become conscious. Most of our decisions are made without any conscious thought about why we do it. So we should practice awareness constantly. If we want to go deep into our bhajan, if we want to learn to live alone, we have to learn to become the observer. And as the observer, we watch and we hear everything that we do, that we feel, and that we think. And that way we're detached. It's not me that wants to watch this movie. It's not me that wants to eat some boga, or me that wants to do this thing or that thing. I'm the spirit soul, and I am the observer, as St. Francis of Assisi said, that what we're looking for is what is looking. And we want to go deep into that, and we want to become detached, we want to become conscious and become the observer. And so then that awareness means that we should apply meditation to everything that we do. And so in turn, that makes everything that we do meditation. When we have this kind of conscious thought, this kind of awareness. But when we don't have a situation like that, and things are very, very passionate, very, very difficult, then most of the time we make our decisions without any conscious thought why we do it. But we're being given a great opportunity now to be introspective. We're being forced to be introspective. And this is, Prabhupada says in his purport in the 13th chapter, this is a great test to see if the devotee can live alone. So at this time, we should be looking, what does Krishna want? Why is he doing this? What does this situation mean? What is Krishna's purpose? In this regard, there's a nice story of one person who was a wealthy landlord in East Bengal, in what today is Bangladesh. His name was Lala Babu. And Lala Babu, he used to go for walks on the river, which he had a huge mansion, which was on the bank of that river. And he would go for walks on the other side of the river, where it was more peaceful for him, where people weren't coming to him all the time, asking him to make decisions and sign things and give money and like that. And one day, as he was walking along, he heard a boatman speaking to another boatman. And the boatman told him, "Oh, brother, the day is over. Go across." And when Lala Babu heard that, he stopped. And he thought, oh. So he got in a boat and he returned home. And the next day, when he was having his walk, he heard a washerman speaking to his wife. And the washerman told his wife, "The day's over, now go and burn the basana." The bark of a banana tree, when they burn it in Bengal, they call that basana. It's a kind of ash that they use. They make some alkali from it for washing clothes. But the word basana also means desire or passion. And when Lala Babu heard that, he thought, oh, he took it to mean the day is over, the days of your life are over. So you should quickly burn your lusty desires. And so those statements of the boatman and the washerman left a deep impression on him, and he decided to leave his opulent life and his family, and he went to Vrindavan, where he began doing bhajan. He installed a wonderful deity of Krishna Chandra in the year 1810 in a stone temple in Vrindavan town. So we should understand we should not be attached. As we're saying, Krishna points out in the 12th chapter of the Gita, Krishna says that that person who's not attached to the ordinary course of activities, he's very, very dear to me. But what is normal for most persons? There's one comedian who said once, she gave a definition of what normal is. And this is what she said. Normal is getting dressed in clothes that you buy for work and driving through traffic in a car that you're still paying for. In order to get to the job, you need to pay for the clothes in the car and the house you leave vacant all day so you can afford to live in it. That's normal. That's the so-called normal. But most people, because they're bahirmukh, they're external persons. Bahirmukh literally means they're facing away from Krishna. That normal is just normal, and they don't think anything more about it. And such persons, they're, as Prabhupada said, they're extravagant. They're external, because and they're extravagant. They're just thinking in terms of money and possessions and things. But we need to become internal. We need to become antarmukh and see the inward things. As Krishna Chaitanya Maharaj once commented, that he said that persons who are no longer interested in the external world, they cultivate inwardness. Yeah? We don't cultivate isolation exactly. That's not our purpose. We cultivate inwardness. And that inwardness leads us to a higher truth about ourselves, in communion with the Lord of inwardness, who's the inner Lord. So that's real communion. It's not isolation. It means we're really coming in contact with that thing of the most substance, which is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So we need to become independently thoughtful. As Srila Prabhupada wrote in one letter in 1972, he said that this Krishna conscious movement is meant for training people to be independently thoughtful. That's the purpose of this Krishna conscious movement. Just today, we sent out our email magazine, our Krishna Katamrita Bindu magazine, and we had a beautiful article from Thakur Bhaktivinoda, which I'd like to read you something from. It's really a wonderful thing. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, this is from his notes on the Bhagavad, which, as far as I know, were never published, but they were found by some of the followers of Bhaktivinoda. And he says there, we love to read a book that we've never read before. We're anxious to gather whatever information is contained in it. And with such acquirement, our curiosity stops. And so we're eager to read a book. We want to get some information from it. But when we get that information, for most people, their curiosity stops. And Bhaktivinoda says this mode of study prevails amongst a great number of readers who are great men in their own estimation, as well as in the estimation of those who are of their own stamp, who have a similar nature. They think they're great persons because I've memorized this information. But Bhaktivinoda says, by matter of fact, most readers are mere repositories of facts and statements made by other people. But this is not study. The student is to read the facts with a view to create, and not with the object of fruitless retention. Students, he says, like satellites, should reflect whatever light they receive from authors and not imprison the facts and thoughts. Thought is progressive. The author's thought must have progress in the reader in the shape of correction or development. The best critic is one who can show the further development of an old thought. But a mere denouncer is the enemy of progress. What a powerful and very, very deep set of comments from Bhaktivinoda Thakur. So some people, they're thinking this is my reading of the Srimad Bhagavatam, my reading of Bhagavad-gītā. Even sometimes devotees are thinking like that. I'm going to memorize some verses. I'm going to study the different analogies that Srila Prabhupada gave. I'm going to learn some lines for Sankirtan, Excuse me, sir, are you from here, from out of town? Really? Will you get one of these? We're passing them out today. Here, take it with you. And we memorize something like that. But rather than just memorizing something, we should learn something. We should learn to think and not just put in prison the ideas that have been given us. Don't put in prison those thoughts, because if we put them in prison, then when we're faced with a different kind of situation, as Krishna again in the Gita in the 12th chapter says, those devotees who are not dependent on the ordinary course of activities are very dear to me. When we're faced with a situation which is not the ordinary course of activities, then at that time, if we're a thinker, if we're antarmukh, if we're internal, and we're always contemplating, what does Bhaktivinoda Thakur mean? What does Srila Prabhupada mean? What does it mean to live alone? And Krishna says this 4 times in the Bhagavad-gītā. How many devotees have really thought about this? That Krishna says 4 times in the Bhagavad-gītā to live alone. Maybe we just think, well, this is just something which doesn't apply to us whatsoever. But it does apply to us. And it's important. But we need to think about it and not just see it in what Srila Bhaktisiddhanta would sometimes call a lexicographical way. Lexicography means dictionary work. To make a dictionary means a literal dictionary definition of a word, where we're just taking an idea and we're just parroting it, we're just repeating it. And then we may find ourselves in big, big anxiety. So Bhaktivinoda, he says that we should develop an old thought. The author's thought should have some progress within us, because the situation that we're in today is not the same as the situation of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. It wasn't even the same as the situation of Srila Prabhupada, who was present 30 years ago. We have a new situation. And whether we like it or not, we're being forced into this situation. And we're being forced to learn to live alone. But if we can't become introspective, then what happens is people become crazy. And there's so many people that are becoming so very, very angry. And some of them are blaming the government. Some of them are blaming Bill Gates, or they're blaming the World Health Organization. They're blaming this thing, or they're blaming that thing. We call this the blame game. We're blaming everyone, but we're not taking responsibility ourselves. Rather, we learn from the first canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam that when Maharaj Parikshit came upon Dharma, the bull, religion personified, who had 3 legs broken by Kali, Maharaj Parikshit asked him, who did this to you? And when he asked Dharma the bull that, and the Dharma the bull is suffering, he's got 3 broken legs. This rascal just did it, and the rascal's standing right there. But Dharma the bull said, well, actually it's very difficult to say who did this. And some people say that such things are caused by material nature, and he gave different answers. But a devotee, they see the Sarva Karna Karna. Just as Gorgashodas Babaji, there's a story about him in Navadvip, that once some group of young boys started throwing stones at him. And Gorgashodas Babaji became angry. And he turned around and he started shaking his finger at them and yelling. And he said, Krishna, if you don't stop this right now, I'm going to tell your mother. So Gorgashodas Babaji, he saw a cause to those stones being thrown at him. But the cause wasn't those young boys. He saw the cause as Krishna. Krishna is the ultimate cause for everything. And for such a devotee who's internal, whatever happens for that devotee, they take it as beneficial. It's good for them. And for such a devotee, they learn to live alone. They learn the art of introspection. They don't want to live with the ordinary world. It helps us to understand persons like Gorgashodas Babaji. It's very difficult. Gorgashodas Babaji is someone we don't often speak about in our society, because in our society we don't want to be bhajananandis, we want to be goshtianandis. We don't want to just lock ourselves up and do bhajan, but we want to go out and preach. But we forget that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, who's the first-class preacher, he began his preaching by coming to Mayapur and chanting 1 billion names of Krishna. He took a vow, which took him, I think, over 10 years, 10, 20 years to accomplish that vow. It began with some contemplation, just like the anavasara period of Lord Jagannath, just like this period for the devotees. If we use this period to become internal, to associate with Krishna and with the devotees in an internal way, then we'll get great strength. Otherwise, we're not interested in associating with the external persons. I'd like to relate to you a couple stories from the life of Gorkishore Babaji in this regard. This is from a series of articles which were written in Bengali by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur called Amar Prabhu, I think is what he called them, My Prabhu. And speaking about his Guru Maharaj, Gorkishore Babaji. So one of them, he told a story about one wealthy landowner whose name was Girish Babu. And Girish Babu, he owned a dharmashala in Navadvip. And Gorkishore Babaji at that time was a very famous sadhak, a very famous sadhu. And Girish Babu and his wife once came to see him, and they asked Gorkishore Babaji, they said, look, we see you're sitting out here all day in the rainy season, the rain's pouring down over you, and you're just doing your bhajan out here. We want to make a small cottage for your bhajan. Will you please allow that? And Gorkishore Babaji replied to them, he said, I have no anxiety in my little staying in the way I am right now. I have no problem. He had some small hut, some straw type of thing. It was problematic. The rain would come through and that. He said, but this is very good. He said, I only have one problem. My one problem is that people are always coming to me, and they're very deceptive people. They're very duplicitous. And they're always coming to me and saying, Maharaj, Kripa Koro, please give us your mercy, give us your mercy. But they're not really interested in their own benefit. And they're always coming to me and disturbing my bhajan. So if you really want to give me something which is beneficial for me, then I would like to request you, give me some of your stool. He told us to Girish Babu and his wife. He said, if you give me some of your stool, that'll be very good. Well, I'll put your stool down right over here next to me, and then people will leave me alone. They won't come and bother me. And Girish Babu's wife, she heard that, she became very disturbed. She said, Babaji Maharaj, how can we do that? If we pass stool and we give it to where you're doing your bhajan, we'll get some terrible sinful reaction. And Gorkishore Babaji said, don't worry about it. He said, I'm not a Vaishnava. You won't get such a result. He said, you know, those people who are the managers of the big temples and have long hair and beards, they're Vaishnavas. He said, I haven't gotten any result in the performance of my bhajan. I've not seen Krishna. Therefore, the place I reside is fit to receive your stool. So if you really want to do something for me, please give me your stool. Otherwise, I have nothing to say to either of you. So Girish Babu and his wife were very horrified. And then they decided, well, even though you won't stay there, still we'll build a second place for you. And even you don't stay in it, one of your servants can stay there. So they had a carpenter, they constructed something out of bricks and they made a nice place. But Gorkishore Babaji never entered that room, never entered that house that they made for him. Rather, he stayed for 6 months in the dharmashala toilet, where people would come and pass their stool and urine. He said it because for him, that was a preferable thing. So we hear about stories like this, and this story about Gorkishore Babaji staying in the toilet is a well-known story amongst the devotees. But how often do we really think about it? And as Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, we may imprison those thoughts, those ideas, and there may be some entertaining story to tell the devotees when we give class. But how does it really apply to me? And this is what real study means. This is what real bhajan means. This is what it means to be antarmukh, or to become internal. This is what it means to learn to live alone. We have to start thinking. We have to start becoming more introspective. There's another story Srila Bhaktisiddhanta tells, which is a very startling story about Gorkishore Babaji. He said that Gorkishore was doing his bhajan, and many people were coming to him and asking him to speak on the Bhagavad-gītā and things. And Gorkishore was feeling a little annoyed that there was so many people disturbing his bhajan. And so then one day, someone came to him and said, Babaji Maharaj, there's going to be a Rath Yatra festival in Navadvip. And Gorkishore at that time told him, oh, very good. You should all go there. That'll be very, very good. You should all go to the Rath Yatra festival. And so then the next day, practically none of the normal persons who would come to see him were there. And just one or two intimate persons stayed with Gorkishore as Babaji. And Gorkishore at that time, he started laughing himself. And someone asked him, Babaji Maharaj, why are you laughing? And Gorkishore told them, he said, these fools, they've gone so they can eat some nice prasadam, some nice rasgullas, and see some pretty girls, and enjoy a good time in the Rath Yatra festival. But they're not interested in sadhu sangha. So that story, which is a little difficult for us to understand, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't have Rath Yatra festivals. But our Rath Yatra festival is not meant for us. Our Rath Yatra festival is meant for the pleasure of Srila Prabhupada, for the pleasure of Lord Jagannath and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. It's meant as a preaching engagement to try to help give some opportunity for people to come to Krishna consciousness. But we should know that we need to begin our Gambhira bhajan. We need to have at least a part of our life. Our life may be mostly absorbed in taking care of the Jagannath Mandir, in a place where thousands of people are going on a regular basis, and we're cooking and doing management and dealing with monies and so many things for that. And that's a necessary, important part of our movement. But we compare sometimes Gaura Leela to being like a cake. A cake, as any child will tell you, has two aspects. It has the bread part, and it has the icing part, the sweet part, the sponge part. Sponge part, and it has the icing part. So similarly, Mahaprabhu's movement has these two aspects. The bread part, the sponge part, is the bigger part of the cake. And the bigger part of Gaura Leela is his preaching, his Prachar Leela. Mahaprabhu's life, there's a formula for it. 24/6/6/12. He spent 24 years living in Navadvip. Much of the time he was preaching on the outside. They were doing Harinam and like that. Then he spent 6 years after taking sannyas traveling in South India and preaching. Then he spent the next 6 years in Jagannath Puri also preaching, but preaching to a small group of his followers who were like his lieutenants. And it was a very intimate gathering. And then the final 12 years of his life, he spent inside the Gambhira. And so this formula is there, 24/6/6/12. Not that we have to follow those particular numbers, but we should learn from that. That we should also have a period of our time for the external thing and a period of time for our internal thing. So the majority of Mahaprabhu's pastime, which is like the sponge of the cake, was done in preaching, and that's the important part of our movement. But there's also an icing part, and the icing part is the relishment. Now, if we look amongst Gaudiya Vaishnavas, we'll see there's two general, in a very broad way, two broad categories of Vaishnavas who we could summarize as being Gostiyanandis and Bhajananandis. The Gostiyanandis, the preachers, they insist that the sponge part of the cake is the most important part. And they say that sometimes they say that the icing part, the sweet part, which is to relish Krishna consciousness in a secluded way, to go internal, we're not allowed to do that. That's illegal. You can only have the sponge part of the cake. But if you only have the sponge part of the cake, the bread part of the cake, it gets pretty dry. Ask any child. And then there's another category of Vaishnavas, many of whom live at Radhakund and other places, who are not interested in the sponge part of the cake or the preaching aspect, and they say the icing is the best part. And we just want to relish and want to go deep in this relishment. But you can give a child, if you give a child a cake, I've seen many children when they eat cake, they only take the icing, and sometimes they leave the sponge part of the cake there. But if you give a child 2 kgs of icing and he eats all of that, what's going to happen to him? He can't digest it. So in a similar way, we can't digest the icing by itself, and whereas the sponge part of the cake, if we only take that, it's very dry. Both are required together. And that's Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's movement. Although he's going 4 times a day to the Jagannath Mandir to have darshan of Lord Jagannath, he's supporting organized religion. At the same time, there's a quiet part. There's a Gambhira bhajan part, where he's teaching us how to learn to live alone. We need to combine both parts together. And this is the meaning of Gupta. The word Gupta means to hide or become secluded. In the Sanskrit, we say Gopayati iti gopi. This is the meaning of the word gopi. Gopayati iti gopi, that's someone who hides their love. That's a gopi. The root word gop also means to protect. So the gopis, they keep their bodies alive with the hope of having Krishna's darshan, and they hide those feelings from other people. The gopis are those persons who don't externally show that to everyone. And so in that sense, we're all on this path of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. We want to follow the gopis of Vrindavan. We want to learn to hide our feelings. I'll finish with a poetic translation of a song. This is from the writings of Nam Alwar, who is a famous acharya in the Sri Vaishnava lineage. And there's a modern rendition, poetic translation of this done by one person, one devotee in 2005. Let me read you this poem that he wrote. It's very, very appropriate, I think. Mumbling and prattling the many names, while onlookers say they're crazy. Entering and not entering cities, standing still or swaying. Swaying is in swaying back and forth. Swaying before a laughing world, they dance, they leap, undone by feeling, and the gods bow down before them. So this is the Krishna conscious movement of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, that we enter, but we don't enter the cities. We're always chanting the holy names. People think we're crazy. The devotees are standing still, or they're dancing, and everyone's laughing. But to get the strength to be able to do that, we need to begin our journey from an inward place, and that's anavasara. That's this period of time now when we need to learn to live alone. We need to learn to understand that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's movement began behind closed doors and it finished behind closed doors. So I want to stop there. We've got about 5 minutes left of the time that I was given. And I'd like to request the devotees, the Bhagavatam describes parasparana katanam pavanam Bhagavad-gītā, that this Hari Katha is not a one-sided thing, but it's paraspara. Paraspara means there's some back and forth. It means that there should be some reflections, there should be some thoughts. Otherwise, as Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, we don't want to just imprison the thoughts, imprison the ideas we've been given. We want to reflect on them and see how this is applicable for me. So I'd like now to request the devotees, if anybody has any reflections, you can go ahead and type them in the comments here. I don't know if there's any other way you can communicate with me. I think you can only do it through those comments. And it would be helpful for me, then I know that somebody was actually listening and not everybody was asleep or not paying attention. Okay. You have a reflection, Krishna? You want to come here? Okay, there's a couple devotees here who are listening, and our wife Krishna Kunshi has a reflection she wanted to share. You have to speak really loud.
Okay.
That's not loud.
I thought that was one of the most important things that I've ever heard from Bhaktivinoda Thakur, that we shouldn't imprison thoughts, but and because that's how our parampara continues, to be able to share something according to time, place, circumstance. That means that somebody actually has realized something, and otherwise it will just becomes ritual and it becomes like another whatever kind of churchianity.
Mhm.
And the other
Okay.
thing that I really admired from my Gurudev is that when something comes to you that you didn't ask for, then you need to see that's Krishna's arrangement. And if we don't learn to be introspective, then we will go crazy in the Lord Dhamma.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So I want to thank the devotees very much. Janardhan Prabhu and Soumya Prabhu and others for helping with this. And we're going to go ahead and stop here now. And I wish all the devotees in ISKCON Brisbane all the best. Jai Jagannath, Jai Shila Prabhupada, Vanchakalpadurubhischa, Kripa Sindhu Devacha, Patitanam Pavanebhyo, Vaishnavebhyo, Namo Namaha.